Breaking news. The weeks are getting longer. And as I adjust my and the show's general standards and the operating system that I think is going to be the most clear-right and overly honest, maybe, is going to be one that revolves around when I can get things done. And it's still early in my developments as someone that speaks on these different topics as much as I used to really allow them to intersperse their meanings and leave the jewel and the diamond in the rough of them to be something that had to be organized and found more or less oneself around a poeticism that truly did a lot of this similar thing where the audience would have to comprehend a concept outside of the bounds of our normal gramarcies. Gramercy is a song by Alicia Keys, Gramercy Park. Regardlessly, I've started some new things this week, and I am trying to do 1 hour a day of something that is a tough thing for me, is something that is not something that I've always given a special part of my day to, but I'm really pleased with how that's going, and I haven't wanted to drop the ball on that. So hopefully I'm compressing some of like my normal chores and day-to-day stuff that the podcast can start turning itself over a little faster again. I already have the title of the next one and even a couple of really incredible concepts that have come out of that hourly working. This week, I want to start off with the thoughtful postulation of pace, our speeds, and how we get from place to place. That a lot of times we could run to get somewhere faster, but we walk. And as we energize our perspective sources and our ears turn up to the sounds that give us that feeling, I would like to give this week's thanks to the words early and late. And this episode doesn't revolve around being on time per se and sticking to a schedule. How great. But it is resounding with the hope that as we do have that compression of our schedules, that bounding from one to the next can be this delicate dance of how exactly we stay within the necessities, and how staying within those necessities can somehow allow the construct of this episode's title to be something that we stumble so perfectly right out of every time, and with God's grace. Glossary. What began as a play on the word thought with a T missing at the end, thos. And then with insight, jump to thossery. Bridge the gap into an available comparison with glossary, and finding the root of that word to be glossa, with the meaning of tongue, it invites one to think that thosa might be seen as the mind's tongue, the area of the brain that articulates the motion of an ideological center in our common understanding of the world in which we live. I seek to explore the current occurrency of normal typicality within our mental modes of cognition. I've recorded sound bites to the sound effects of various frequent happenings that I believe will most help a shaping of advance into further parts of speech by looking at where those words of ours start, the events of change that give us pause. I will use those effects in effect to build each weekly episode onto a based segmentation of what comes to inspire best, a partition of the week's news and considerable perspective writings that with every prayerful sighting might bring an evolved ability to adorn our expressions of the language and use with greater fluidity and meaning and complexity toward progression. So, with each episode building a more developed approach and ultimately a larger sequencing of our communication, I will examine the bigger points of view and present a glossary of thinking that, with diligence, aligns missing pieces to the puzzle that is society's confusing mix of histories in a form that I think helps put edge to edge and befitting in many flexibilities, gives access to deeper purposing when it seems most impossible at present to see music in the messy with any clarity. Glossary. Episode 5. Long Accident. There's a simpler point getting into this all in considering an accident that happens at once. And I pray that we've all had only so the accidents that we appreciate with the presence to know that they didn't bring any mortal but considerations towards their impacts. But with that said, I think out of my accidents, I know I've only learned how to become in deeper power over my living and to become in deeper power over our dying is a contrasting awareness, I think, that I know I've been enticed to bring deeper and deeper trust and familiarity with in that time. But long accident, the concept here that I'm really reaching for is one in which there is this calamity, there is a falling, there is crashing, or there is overly positioned all these tinier accidents, maybe, as sort of representatively particular kind of fractalization of that problem, of that error in the facet to our identities, possibly, but that there are the long accident that we engage in on a regular basis that are kind of like the 3 or 4 year errors that we, from a spiritually new age kind of place like that, we sign up for, that our souls sign up for. That's a very repeated and confounded description of what we're doing in life, with maybe something that is misleading. I don't believe in many different lives. I think we are our own special, unique bodies that interact spiritually with everything around us in ways that are magnificent. But when I think about these long accidents, these general hardships to some degree that we face, there is only the reason to say that, number one, like those smaller accidents that might only so be helping us, these long accidents are things that we do choose to build contract upon and to exercise the power of our willful resilience and intelligence founded in its confronted appearance as something that kind of keeps rolling its way down the hill. I use the word stumble, and stumbling is kind of a easier sounding word than to trip or to fall smack on your face or something like that. So a stumbling is not necessarily a falling. There's stumbling blocks. But this long accident is something that might representatively be a tendency to those blocks that build upon themselves in ways that make it more of a bad left turn, even too. To think of a car accident, there's a lot of different things that seemingly are motioning at the inopportune phenomenon that ends itself as an accident. And how long does that accident keep going? That there are the pileups. And so bless our hearts to understand that we can avoid those, but we can only so avoid them within our long accident, our long accidents, and everything that is occurring to be judged within a place of incident. It's accidental incidents that shapes the sense to say it wasn't planned, it wasn't supposed to happen. But as much of what goes on here can see things coming. An animal, in the sense of an accident, will somewhat, quote, die in the hole it falls in, was a thought that I wrote down here. And I spoke of it much towards a psychological phenomenon that is less about an animal falling in a hole that it can't jump up out of, like a steep canyon or that kind of thing, and it has to follow the canyon out, or that kind of patterned happening that makes the animal just sort of sit in the bottom. But as the world is also connected, as we avoid those holes, those pitfalls, with the diligence that we carry on a daily basis, this psychological construct, we're an animal that doesn't have, maybe, I'm speaking from an animal perspective, like the kind of therapy or the kind of professorship that humans offer each other at levels that are more apparent, that an animal can find itself trapped within the confines of its own mind based on an experience that, like a PTSD, needs its healing, that the scars and the wounds of its mind need to shape out the ways in which those scars become markings and maps of its future success. But for there to be a long accident concepting towards that applied thought, I think try to imagine how much a small accident that begins to happen at the beginning of a creature's life, how that can cascade, domino forth towards other instances in which there is further sense that there is a crash, there's a accident of nature in what's transcending at a time that we don't connect with that same instantaneous accident. And maybe I'll find through the end of putting through and out this episode that one of the most important things that I'm doing here is actually connecting that there are those instantaneous accidents, but flush with those long accidents, that we shouldn't separate them in our minds in the way that we dichotomize and organize their appearances. But further, what gives in this long accident? And as I say this, I want you to think about how during those accidents there's the opportunity to act with a heroism or a fast acting, swift judgment of instinct towards safety, and to eject oneself from the momentary incidentalism of that accident's impact. And in this long accident, is it more in as you acknowledge it? Do you have to acknowledge more about what your life is operating on that is an accident in order to have those kind of quick instincts towards it? One of the mental acuities that I'm constantly exercising is to always and frequently be operating my mind with, as I've said, it's kind of like an OCD, but it's this hyperactivity too, an ADHD, towards the momentary passing of the medium expression that I allow into my being. And I think it keeps my mind ready to act quickly. And I could only guess how much it is me dancing along this long accident, that I'm constantly being aware and acknowledging where my generalized accepted long accidents are present within me in which to give the proper internalized complex to my brain, and so that I can be ready. Humor was the knock-knock hunch of the week, in which I observed myself considering how the comedian describes trying different acts and stories, jokes that sometimes don't hit right, and from an experienced comic, it's been said that it takes sometimes years of working different material, and really, I'm talking like the same material as I understood it, in order for it to fit what really jives with the audience and the presentation and the confidence that the comic speaks it with is a revealing aspect of how positively, if it is so a long accident, that the molding and remolding and the casting of our long accidents can be truly mystifying. And this was the first hunch in a great way, because it constituted this idea of long accident as something that we're doing frequently, and it is involved in our explorations, but it brings about the challenges in which we're reforming our thoughtfulnesses, and in order to be in greater coherence with what our missions are. I think that's the short of the hunch towards what humor is. And as for branching out into where we can think about these other things that we're trying towards, I believe that it has so been revealed so far for us, and as it has been thought through without being given, that these long accidents are particularly exactly the conversational partners, the duels that we choose to have as humans, and it kind of maybe recapitulates what accident should really mean, and that our accidents are the magnificent representations of our levels towards expertise and function that enliven the sacred being of our actions, the geniuses of our overall abilities. And maybe not overall, maybe underalls. The accident, the approach, the portrayal of the ways in which we engage with these so-called long accidents, and the ways in which we observe their incidental, immediate accidencies builds fruit as it reveals the ways in which we can come to greater worship of those passing surprises. An accident is a surprise. It's not intended, and it's something that we can perceive in the ways in which we believe are necessary. And as this show seeks to build the glossary of thinking, that as we build a foundation that's focused on turning each of those accidents into our advance, into our embetterment, I believe that we're seeing through our long accidents into magnanimously, is a guess, into our biggest and best next steps, into our hopeful tiding and never misgiving. High confidence intervals. The lights on towards where in which long accident occurs began actually as a more positively guarded idea, where the truth of my life looks a lot like I have a problem with authority figures, but in the intelligences and the accidents that I allow into that space. I was thinking about it last night after I'd gotten home from work and was getting my cats some food, I believe, that I have a history of never wanting to keep my mouth shut if a superior was enacting something that I decidedly found incorrect. And even if that turned into fighting, I've long learned since my first time in a band, actually, was my first time trying to put music together with other people, that I learned how to raise my voice and have my utmost opinion in its best and most hopeful expressionary flaring, of what we were really thinking. We all somehow, I think, got a lot out of that kind of conflict, and its resolution brought maybe some extra flavoring to our music. But since then, and as jobs have come and passed and seemingly been floundering, and definitely with their aspects that I thought were needing my advising, that yes, in one of my long accidents, I absolutely will disregard what a superior wants of me and try and assert why I think that something is a different way. And this is all relating to high confidence, and where, as an academic, and believing that, yes, I could surmount the varying problems of our gridlocked advance into new ideas. As a physicist, I was an undergraduate physics major, that I would have to throw away some of what I was learning and see things in a way that was beyond that. And I want to say that I learned about that from observing different documentaries on past scientists that have forged a new path and changed the game themselves. And I've incorporated it into my different daily livings in the most appropriately tender and hopeful and seeking of understanding ways I can. But along that road, it has very much instilled a high confidence that even individuals that may stand high in academia, for say, that I am somebody that exists at a place above them. And the long accident is that it has driven me into a place that looks a lot like a flailing of my limbs in and through the crashing of different elements that might kill me. But I think it's not without its tests and its striving to put me in positions in which I might have the opportunity to prove that I should have that high confidence over and above them. And I'm saying that it's driven me to a place to understand things that a lot of those in academia would never come to understand out of their beliefs. And it's a very hot topic issue with the ways in which our government and society is turning to perceive what a lot of those in academia seek to impart upon the rest of society, because many of them seem short-sighted and without the full picture of the needed vulnerability, I'd say. That one of the biggest things that I have tried to uphold within my decision making is that I trust in which gives me the strength to undergo life-threatening pain. Because I have had very serious immediate accident that I think, upon what I was speaking in the intro, gives insight to the big picture of this episode being this accordion, this relative fractaling, completionary attempt to not only look at long accident, but then within an accident, say it occurs over 10 seconds, to then understand that out of our spiritual workings, we can take those 10 seconds and we can draw it out years. We can look at each one of those things with what would be kind of like this perfect memory, as much as these long accidents, bring about the thankfulness of their passings and scar the brain as another idea that I'm really pleased with, that our brains are scarring into the prevention of the further issues, and how much I know that I would be stupid to undergo certain pains again as much as I've experienced their accidental in part. But the lights on. The lights are on. That was this section, that high confidence forms a basis of long accident. And we need to obviously accept when we're beaten by the higher places, but as we'll see in a further point of this episode, the objectification of objects as gods, as devils or demons, and metaphysically, like the metaphors, the metacognitive bridge here, the observation of our thinking in the ways in which it is very much not really cognition. Maybe if we're thinking like a metaphor that isn't so exactly what occurs there, but it can be applied as a simplification, that the high confidencing, the epitomization of it as its own special creature, as a metaphor, is, as you'll see, going to be tied well into a further point that puts together the fact of our worshiping as a pivotal skill in which, with all this going on, this high confidencing, I'm saying those that we try to surmount our powers and our abilities over, those people that we say, I'm better than you, as much as I believe that we're all so entirely worthy of the paths that are so set forth and given to us upon our striving, that there's no way to say that you are better, because within even a qualitative expression of a test score or an ability to compete at a higher level, there's always another thing. That I'm saying this epitomization of something, as we're saying, well, why are we bringing this idea of a further point of where we're building a god, or we're building this demon of something? That there's a demonization capable of allowing us not to necessarily so think that we are killing and surmising the relationship with a superior in such a way that is anything but your own personal long accident. So to avoid future confusions, get the kids out of them, was the picture that I thought could build a chapter well deserved of an alarm. And firstly, I think the religious idea in which there's doctrine supporting the childlike aspects of one's personhood to remain in faith through the long accident. And I've thought a lot about the ways in which this has been helpful and useful and detrimental. With, I think, the first swing at its beneficence that necessitates the need of, well, what is really quite the kid form? And, well, what is childlike? And in getting the kids out of them, it's sort of like saying, well, get all those little accidents as so formulaic of being an adult one day, get all those little things out of them. And so to avoid future confusions. Because adultery is another concept here that, with its misdefiance, there is sleeping with somebody out of wedlock. But as to where in which we are wed and so locked to say that we have a marriage toward not even a person, our livelihoods, and adultery can just as easily swing back to, okay, well, we're supposed to look at this as, well, we're not supposed to be an adult. We're supposed to be children and following our whims of our parent God, our Father in heaven, that so speaks to guide and protect us through our lives, and then we need not worry of the challenged dangers that lie ahead, but we need the obedience to follow those covenants and to be the good little children that help the Father in their actions and get to live with the innocence and the playfulness that can largely be seen as things that people kind of understand that they have to do their best to keep around as they age. The hopeful furtherization of this kind of topic, albeit with so many different perspectives of yore that can be unabounded by not focusing on them here, I hope with the long accident idea, there's a formulation, there is again, identification towards what I know I was aiming at, I think, with this topic in avoiding future confusion, that we are all blessed with the accident of being a kid. And as for where and in which that's a never-ending accident, I hope it can realize how much, with the postulation that these accidents are things in which we're only just building and shaping our minds to have higher capacities and on our missions to be who we are, that with all of these there is great and appreciable skills, and so to be skillful is also just to be a source of amusement and entertainment, that there's no such losing how to be a kid, but there is always how much you learned as you lost your kids. We worship as a god. This, as it is left, works much to think about the ways our geographic appreciations, the ways in which we think we kind of have a sense for the other countries of the world can largely be in the same air of the ways that we observe, like, God. I was looking around the globe and I was observing different geographical features, and I was kind of amazed because I didn't realize some of the intricacies that were occurring in one of these areas of the world, one of these regions that I hadn't really seen as such. The blessing of it came with this sense about kind of our international political considerations, that really do shape our day-to-day. And what we consider is matter of fact, out of very simply not a lot of background information. To have the total picture of any other country's actions is like trying to complete the impossible ring, the impossible circle of life without trusting it as a god. But I'm speaking much to say that we need to rein in some of our approach. We need to look at the ways in which we're judging the world, I think, as accidents, per the episode here, that rely on this basis of kind of there being a lot missing sometimes from our true interpretation. And we have religious practice and gospel and preaching and learned experience to teach us what this idea of God, the God, Father, who gave his only Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, so that we might understand heaven altogether, is really looking at not really the same thing that we can so cognitively put together, think about. And in the pattern of my confusion here, I I hope there's only the dips and dodgings of the fact that I'm not revealing exactly where and which this concept was derived from, that maybe there's something truthful in the fact that I've taken some of my memory, my operating computational power around this idea totally out of the table, and little roots that I had in that idea are missing. So I'm lacking the togethered expression of where I was trying to seek with this. But the unlocked door, I don't have in that sound so much of the walk inside. And so the door opened here, hopefully for you, and furthering of our knowledge to international appreciation. I don't know, I'm at a loss of words. That we look at some of the things in our world, I'd say, even beyond that, beyond internationalism, so that we build our own little gods. And it's kind of the metaphors a little bit, right? It's kind of those things that are maybe demonized for our benefit, or the hopes to say that we need to deepen our understanding of religions to something that's, maybe found in this show, but that allow us to organize our relationships with those things that might as well be gods in the interests that yield the profit, to not get so lost amongst the confusion that arises out of the need for our limited mental acuities, in the face of also the absolute presence of the knowing towards those concepts. The map needs to continue to be written and described in the same scope as we have mapped Earth, and there is maybe the final aesthetically pleasing point of how much within those maps we could still see very defined and accurate detail of the coastlines and the geographic features that we were close to and had spent more time with. But we also allowed for there to be the vast errors of blurriness and some great word out there that would describe how much there's a discontinuity, discontinuous bridging to the fact that we still know we're on a globe, we still know we're on this sphere. But as for how we can have the right mapping and planing of that sphere on a two-dimensional surface, there's much to say for all the explorers out there. And cartographers, of course, in this sense. Everybody's favorite, the card shuffle. Here we go, where I try and run through a rapid randomized list of some of the bigger, more exciting, and also somewhat supported in false manufacturing of the things that I actually didn't necessarily think were immediately going in this section. I came up with the first 4 of these 8 certainly as points, and the last 4 I'm revealing were ones that I kind of looked back, well, gosh, like what have I been thinking in the last week? And kind of plucked and chose from those. Plucked and choose, because it'll likely happen again. There's no need to say that I should speak that into the past tense. Number 1 this week. How birds talk is how cats talk. I have 5 parakeets. I have 4, soon to be 3, cats. One of them is just being fostered of the cats. He can't stick around with the other 3, and I won't be trying to have another of those 4 cat kind of really beautiful and awesome kind of prides. I don't know, a pride of cats, a group of cats. I don't know what you call them, group of house cats. It's really cool to see 4. I really appreciated when I happened to be kind of thrown my 4th as the brother to the sister that I had already adopted. And 4 was a great number, but mine are only going to work as 3 with, frankly, that brother that was thrown into the mix. He's a little bit of a dominating kind of type and doesn't really want to, I think, share any more of the relational capacity of the house with another. But amongst those communications with the cats and also with the birds more newly, I see a lot into how they communicate, and it was actually bringing home the cat that I'm now only fostering that I acknowledged how much there was a seeking out of his meows. He was sitting in the cage in the back of my car as I drove home, who had been fostering him from the shelter. Sort of an interesting kind of sequence towards adopting him, because I actually paid for the old foster's lift up to more downtown of Salt Lake City from down in the south side of the valley, and met with this new cat, and then offered to also be her ride home because she takes public transit. And so on the way home, I was hashing out different kind of ideas of, cat intelligence and like kind of what kind of work we both do. And I had Seal in the back, this fostered cat, his name is Seal. And he was meowing, and I was really able to kind of showcase a degree of multitasking communication with the 2 of them in a way that I thought was pretty cool. Because I would be hearing what the foster had to say, and I'd be hearing my heart just all towards Seal, and thinking, gosh, well, what is he thinking about? And I'd be meowing and sort of cradling and carrying him as energetically as I could with my motions, and then also still trying to have a conversation with the foster. So it was a special opportunity to have a cat that was so stressed out in that, and also kind of this new person that I had never met. It was really kind of a pinnacle experience that I don't think you can really replicate so much. But there is an expression that occurs, for a cat and its meows, and maybe it does have to do with a momentary dialect, like a language that hasn't been formed yet, but I believe it occurs with birds too, that a lot of their speaking is reliant on the kind of energy that they receive back, that they're searching amongst a confusion within them and spurring out the response of the environment surrounding that then they interpret, and they can start to develop a little bit more of a founded basis to communicate. And as for a great point towards my ability with that, I have understood well within my comforting attempts, my efforts to bring peace to my other cats and animals, that there's much that you can give your attention towards that bring a commune of you and those animals' experience. And I think I kind of want to say, well, and in further, when are we communicating just as birds, just as cats, just as ourselves, in observing the way that what we're putting out into the world is being received, in the language that occurs as some of that comes back. The second topic, blanco y blanco. So this is founded off of kind of like that, hey, you want to go mano y mano, hand to hand kind of. And when I wrote it, I was like, it's not like and as much. But hand in hand, possibly. I quickly went towards blanco y blanco after thinking this is kind of like hand-to-hand combat. But it wasn't. And it was kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of more of like a battle of white and white. And I speak of a white and a white, thinking of more of like the light of our spiritual piety. That within blanco y blanco is this idea that I think we're just sort of fighting, like who has the higher blanco. And in regard for where that light comes from and the observation of kind of that circle of life, to know the ring, the unattainable pathway of the limitless expanse, guiding our humanities, and then even amongst, and also the world maybe too, and all of its creatures. It's where we connect towards more of an animalistic kind of thing. The blanco y blanco is a very, very difficult fight to judge. and to see even, maybe, but in seeing exactly those blanco y blanco moments, there is always more of a map to be carded. I don't know how to say drawn or depicted, but like a cartographer, carted, is that the word? That would be a good word. Number 3, Lord and verse horde. The early gods, this point, sought to look at more of our words that have a D at the end, like Lord. I'm speaking at the Lord, possibly. But I actually wrote it more kind of like you would spell bored, but instead of a B, there was an L at the beginning. Then there's the opportunity to look at these words that end with a D and think, okay, well, what if this was an ED? What if this word was more about like Lord? And because, well, Lord, it might have been the sourced insight that there could be a sense that it's actually like the lore, the folk tale, that Lord is right one and one towards, because it's spoken the same. And I was thinking, well, what's kind of maybe another word in this sense? And I wrote out horde. And horde actually is not Lored, which is how I would spell Lord, like folk-tailed. But horde is actually spelled Horde. So there's the reverse to the DE. And the early gods come to mind as I look at horde and I think about early gods that our ancient societies looked at. And I thought, gosh, a horde, what a magnificent kind of meta concept that is one where you'd kind of say, oh, well, there has to be a god of chaos, or a god of this activity in the streets, and of the creaturous, I don't know, like the pestilence and the overcoming the hordes, of the loaches, or that kind of thing, that very much were worshipped as gods. And it is very close to Lord, our Lord. And I think I want to leave you with that. Then if we were to say Lord, our Lord, Lord, but know that as a god before transferring towards what I'm saying is like folk-tailed, the Lord. And if we could look at the Lord as kind of a god in which we would look at a horde of God, that there's a peeling back of God, I think, there. As we look at each of those individual lores as one of maybe those individual hoarding creatures, one of each of those hoarding, and we'll hoard to store, like a hoard is hoarding of something, of this excess, right? There's a gluttony of possession, but maybe try and think about Lord next time as a horde of the Lord, and that we once facilitated more of a common look at it being kind of a not maybe subversive, but of a sub-god. Number 4, Hawaii. And I'm not going to remember exactly why I felt like branching into riding Harleys in Hawaii, the Katy Perry song. But those hogs and Harleys, means somewhat to gather and to gain. Har is a Germanic word, I believe, more confidently than other guesses I might have. But Hawaii, when Lahaina burned a couple years ago, I was working that next night since the fires first broke out, and it was a graveyard shift. And as the morning rose and I was texting my nuclear immediate family about it, I kind of, within a conspiracy or not, as much as it was kind of still kind of crazy, like that maybe this was some sort of like laser or a test of like an energy weapon on something. This is where we might need the redacting forces of the U.S. government, maybe U.S. government, who is involved in all of that, but that I actually thought that something possible towards its occurrence was that it was an attack, number one, but number two, that it was a new age of attack. What I picked up, what I read about the fires of Lahaina was that it was a directed energy weapon possibly, but that number two, in this new age of things, that I thought the war had been taken towards a cyber realm, that there was something brought within our cyber defenses by maybe, one of our adversaries that said, we are going to take this from you in the cyber world, because we know we need to be advancing our computerizations, our programmings, whatever forth, but that it was a cyber thing, and that if we do take that from you, your whole country better know. Your country will know. And we will attack Hawaii at Lahaina, and we saw those fires rage as they did. Maybe, the firewall, is something to protect our technology from different viruses. And the warfaric attitudes within our cyber abilities are important. And as for why I thought there would be somewhat of an attack into our cyber realm, and that maybe there was the consequent sense to say that, we're also going to make it known that it was something that happened out of an actual physical attack, but that couldn't necessarily be traced, is aside from the point, maybe. But that's a big reveal for what that could be. Though I kind of also wanted to align that sense that they didn't take Hawaii in the fact that Canada is very much, I think, being pulled and tugged away from the United States of America's better reliances, and Canada's resources pale Hawaii's potential success and advantage, and that as much as I would love to put a PSA out for whatever, would make things better, I really think we need to worry about the kind of covert operations that are occurring in Canada and stop some of this autoimmune, politically perspective building against the United States and to some degree like supporting Canada. It's too easy for a cyber realm of action to be skewing the ways in which we're believing things about that kind of thing. And, well, what? Let's just focus on the long accidents. Number 5, smart again. This was a huge thing for me because I was in the process of considering, well, why do I think I'm more intelligent than some of these other things that I see put amongst, a similar kind of angle? And it's to revolve around that very, very old age idea of being born again Christian. That there, at some point in our spiritual lives, a moment where we come upon the opportunity to say that I'm new, and to be smart again, I think revolves around some of my experience speaking with a lot of people from other countries that have different accents and speak different dialects of English even, and my work amongst my animals, and most collectively how much I have explored the different ways in which our English can still scratch and work and clear the surface of our deeper intelligences through poetry and the use of different punctuations, and punctuations even beyond what you think about a comma or a quotation or even like a hyphen in a way that isn't, but in the ways in which I have created mathematically definable, maybe not understandable, figures of expression that I think our brains really want to grab onto and represent the ways in which they're thinking with this quantumly enabled spiritual world. But sometimes you sound kind of stupid. Sometimes I'll be speaking amongst, this podcast and I can't think of a word, or I will slur a word and speak it kind of like with a lisp. There's 2 lisps in the last episode. But I think it is exactly what we need to do. Become smart again. And allow ourselves to be dumb as we have to, because we, like being born again, you might commonly have experienced a death. Smart again, you have to experience stupid. And to get that mind out of itself, so it can connect ideas in ways that the linearity of our traditional English forbids. Number 6, I watched a great podcast about cancer treatment and protecting the immune system from the radiation, from the chemically based therapies, and that there are these what are called kilocells that can be injected into the body before one of those treatments, and they call it a bioshield. And for appreciation's sake and for where you can find it, maybe understand that you know about it. And within that light, it might just be diffracted, refracted, bouncing off amongst, our consciousness. But I have confidence that there's a real treatment of our immune systems that, for the first time, are very much like a red blood cell transfusion, but it's focused on the white blood cells. And that what has been uncovered is that one of the primary things that prevents somebody from healing and recovering from those intense cancer treatments, as much as they have their advance too, is that the immune system goes kind of kaput, and there's a sepsis that can engorge the body out of that kind of issue. But if you inject these kilo cells, the bioshield, amongst that, they show incredible results of the efficacy of those treatments that I've heard need to be more or less mandated. So look out for that. Number 7, ocean. The ocean. So I hope with this one you can just sort of take your happy little O's and figure out exactly where different other words are building out their character. Sort of a little bit of an assignment, and maybe I won't remember exactly what word began this sort of thing, but it came at a very pivotal point, and I was thinking like this word, and it has an O, and when I say that, it provides that next step out of cataclysm. But the ocean, there is I think Chinese-based clothing brand that's called Shein, Shein. And so when I was thinking later in the week, after I was rifling through other words that had about 4 letters and the letter O, at some point I came to ocean. And as so special, you might see the ways that your thoughts are guiding themselves to fruition. Ocean is the sea, and where do we find the O? So to provide the backing of what is all within that circle of life, it is not a heat sink, it is together. Number 8, the last one this week, was sourced from the stories about the 10 Commandments, and within legislation of varying more Republican states, that there's a fight to keep them in the teaching of elementary and the schoolhouse of our appreciations and of our guidings. And for many reasons, it's challenging to think, do they really need to know about that? Because they are such very pertinent laws, and I'd say forces each towards a society that sustains love and respect. And I, for one, attended a Catholic elementary and middle school, from first grade to most of seventh grade. And so, although I was never baptized, as the sort of big biographical detail, I learned a lot about the Bible and Jesus, and of course the Ten Commandments and the Catholic religion through my time there. And I hope you can ponder about the ways in which it's a very, very good thing that kids would learn about the Ten Commandments. But I further thought about, okay, well, if we're trying to oust the commandments, well, what should they be learning? And I think I thought about this sort of discombobulated and not necessarily so towards the lesson to be sharing at this point with you, but, well, what did the commandments turn into, right? They turned into maybe more of our full-fledged law and things like the Miranda rights. And the Miranda rights, I think, are a funny point to go to, well, because, well, are all our kids gonna learn and have on the wall of their classroom the Miranda rights, so that when they're arrested, they'll know that they can keep their mouth shut? I don't know. I mean, it's just an example, though, to say, well, what of our future can we learn today, and what of our past will we do away? I believe in a higher and more just law than we find in our legislature, and I think anybody that has really invested, really given support towards our law enforcement would see how much there needs to be a following of a higher law than what's there. And those that follow the courts, frankly, can, I think, find a great sense of peace in how much we have that, because each case needs all of its very detailed circumstance. But how many times are people brought to the law unjustly? I think it's where our government knew how much we need to rely on God. But will we do away with a lot of the laws we have? In 100 years, will it seem ridiculous to try and be teaching of our present lawfulness? In Moses' time, they believed an eye for an eye and a hand for a hand. And there's something right about that. Then we must have a metaphor about giving and receiving what we do with others at a fair, balanced, and equal way. But, yeah, where our lawfulness is going to go, and how much is it like the ways in which our long accident as a kid and as somebody that picks an enemy and chooses to be stronger than it and always knows that you will follow the path in which you become. So, towards the alarms of all their many forms in which we can worship deeper and clearer, and with the sense that we're always becoming